everybody, and welcome to the show. Big day today. We've got a wonderful, wonderful author here. And we're going to be talking about what I think is probably the most foundational issue we're facing, which is why are we asleep? Why are so many people in this country willing to go along with these absurd thoughts? For example, I'm a boy. I was born with boy parts. I'm not a girl. I can pretend to be a girl. I could put a dress on, but I still have boy parts. I was still born a boy, and I will always be a boy. How do you get to a point where otherwise sane people are willing to say, well, yeah, but he wants to pretend he's a girl, so we should all play along? How does that happen? How do we get there? Right? So, yeah, this is an interesting thing. And got a guy named T.S. Dixon who literally wrote the book on it. And he wrote this book, Wokism, Liberalism, Leftism, and Globalism, the Woke Mind Viruses. So I'm very interested to talk with him because I think that foundational to understanding what's wrong in our country and what we're facing and what's the issues is understanding, the kind of push to get people to believe in these absurd frameworks, right? These absurd thought frameworks, right? So we'll get to that. We're going to be doing that. Meanwhile, lots in the news as well. I saw a report that we may see that some Epstein list stuff drop today. Now that's unconfirmed, and I don't know whether it's true or not. And I don't know. I'm certainly not holding my breath, but we certainly need to see some of it. And let me put this out there. Every day that the Epstein list is kept private, we have public officials, high-level bureaucrats, and elected officials who are still being blackmailed with it. This is a national security threat. And I'm sick of seeing people on X, trust the plan, trust the plan. We'll get there. It takes time. Listen, it does not take time. There was no time wasted by Merrick Garland going after J6ers. J6ers were in jail so fast it made your head swim. There was no time wasted at all. There is no need to waste a lot of time. If you have video evidence of someone participating in pedophilia, you put them in jail. You certainly get them out of a position where they could still sell national secrets or open the door to national. But we've had no high-profile arrests, no high-profile action. Nobody wants to talk about this. And worse yet, I get people who are telling me, I literally have people that, well, you got to trust the plan. I don't know. I don't have to trust a plan. I'm not a leftist. I'm not a sheep. I don't trust a plan unless I can verify the plan, and I've seen no plan. I trust Trump, but I also know that during Trump's first term, his AG screwed him over right and left. I'll trust it when I see something. Don't just tell me trust the plan. When I see someone in handcuffs who was a high-level political official or a billionaire, then I'll trust a little bit. But don't tell me to trust a plan that I don't know exists. Right? Don't tell me to trust a plan I can't verify. Don't tell me that I shouldn't be calling for this to happen faster when our national security secrets are still at risk and the blackmail scheme that Jeffrey Epstein put into place still stands and will continue to stand until such time as someone does something about it and takes the power from the people who were on the list. There is no other way. It's just that simple. So if there was no impetus, I'm fine. Listen, I would love to see the investigation on the Open Foundation, George Soros, and all these riots and the civil unrest that they're doing. But I can wait on that because I understand that it takes time to get that RICO action put together. That's complicated. I understand that there's probably a RICO action to be had with the Epstein stuff as well. But I also know that there's a national security impetus. We've got to get that dealt with. Nobody is dealing with that. And the idea, well, just if they didn't have to respond to you all the time, Renz, it wouldn't matter. Bull crap. That's bull crap. That's a load of crap. Listen, if Chuck Schumer's on that Epstein list and if there's video of him doing something wrong, put that SOB in jail and put him there yesterday. Our kids deserve better. Our country deserves better. And the idea that we're going to just sit quietly because we're supposed to trust the plan is absolute garbage to me. I ain't doing that. I sat quietly and trusted the plan under the second Bush. Look what that left us. You want to trust the plan? Join the Democrat Party. You want to think for yourself and fight for freedom? Be MAGA, because that's the difference, right? All right. Lots more to do, and I feel pretty strongly on this one, so it is what it is. But for today, please support us. GiveSendGo.com/Renslaw. GiveSendGo.com/Renslaw. And also, if you believe in us and you believe in the fight, go to TomRens.com. TomRens.com. And today we got a new affiliate on there, Heaven's Harvest. And listen, they've got heirloom seeds. They've got all sorts of prepper stuff. You want, stuff that can last you weeks, months, whatever. They've got healthy, organic, non-GMO, wonderful, wonderful products. And you can get heirloom seeds from these guys. So if you want to grow your own stuff, if you're into prepping, if you're into taking care of your own stuff, Heaven's Harvest, you got to go there. Use checkout code RENS. You get a 10% discount. Checkout code RENS. Heavensharvest.com/Rens and use code Rens. You get 10% discount. It's a great company, great people, wonderful, wonderful people. I can't say enough good about them. So please support them. All right. Without further ado, let me bring on T.S. Dixon, who wrote the book on the woke mind virus. How you doing, sir?
Hey, Tom. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for your work and for joining us. So tell us a little bit about the books. I mean, listen, the title's a little bit self-explanatory. The woke mind, wokeism, leftism, or wokeism, liberalism, leftism, and globalism. So there's a little bit of, we got a hint what it might be about, but tell me about this.
So the impetus for the book was that when I became a conservative in the early 2000s, more than 2 decades ago, I had to do a massive amount of consumption of news and media to sort through everything. And then I have done decades of research in order to try and put the geopolitical puzzle together. And it took a long time. And as I look across the landscape, even to someone like Donald Trump, who was politically active for 50 years before he became president in 2016, he still had a lot of missing pieces of the puzzle about the deep state, about the Rhino Republicans, how treacherous they were, about the stay behind networks, about globalism and the globalist network, about wokeism. And he was caught off guard, and he paid a huge price for 8 years for that lack of education. And he paid a high tuition fee to learn what he's learned now, coming back stronger than ever before in his second term. And this is the case I've noticed with most conservatives that really want to understand what's happening. It takes years and decades to try and put a mystery together, almost like you're solving a puzzle. And it just shouldn't be that way. And so what I wanted to do with this book was take all of these elements and all of these strings and tie them all together and fast track that 10 to 20 to 50 year process down to a 9-10 hour read, and finally have a resource you could put in someone's hands and fill them in on, more than 100 years of history, where we come from, where the left comes from and their coalition, what they truly believe in, who their real founding fathers were, what their real history points of origins are, and what are their tactics, how to stop them.
Well, and that's really, really, it's critical, and people need to be reading this. They need to be understanding this, because you're right. You're right. The red pill process takes a lot of time. And so just, and Tudor and I are just meeting each other, by the way, folks. We met each other before the show. This isn't, something where we've been coordinating a plan for a long time. So just meeting me, I'm fairly newly red pilled. I was conservative my whole life. But, going back to 2019, I was still pro-vax. I had no clue what was going on. It wasn't until COVID that I really woke up to a lot of these things. And, it's an interesting thing, because the amount of work and research you have to do to understand what's happening. And, I was a little bit more awake on the wokeism and the leftism and the liberalism and that sort of stuff, but not so much on some of the other issues. So it's great that you got a resource. Now let's talk about how you break this down. Like, in the book, like, how do you take someone who's new to this?
Yeah.
Where do you start? What's your approach?
Well, to understand the conflict of our time and all of the strange things that are happening in the world that should make everyone scratch their head and go, something isn't right. Something is, what they're telling me on TV is not true. And that should begin this process of seeking. And so when you get into that process, what the fundamental thing that you need to understand is in my opinion, ideology. And when we talk about the woke mind viruses, what we're really talking about are deadly, violent, conquest-seeking ideologies of a political nature. And so I start off always at the root of the issue, and then the point of origin, what the root is and where it started. Its exact point of origin, and then we unpack it from there. And so I start with my definition of an ideology, which I deem to be a collection or set of ideas that forms a view of the world and sets a mission or an objective, especially a political ideology. And I go through a pattern of when certain ideologies sort of blow up and become huge mainstream popular ideas, and then they change civilization as a result. And so I go back in history and show this pattern of where you have the ideology developing over years through what I call intellectual forefathers. So usually there's 2, 3, 4 intellectual fathers that write the books that express and pack the ideas together into a grouping. And then you'll have what I call the spiritual father or forefather, or the charismatic leader that then takes those ideas as a collection. And they're usually like a president or a dictator or an emperor or something like that. And they sweep the ideology into the society, changing it fundamentally. And the example I use is one we should all know of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who developed the ideas of Greek philosophy or Hellenism and the Greek language and culture. And then Aristotle was the tutor of Alexander the Great, who then became emperor of the known world and swept Hellenism, the ideas of these intellectual fathers, all over the world. As a result, he conquered every country from Greece to India and down to Egypt, and even Judea. And so as a result, the New Testament in the time of Jesus, who came after Alexander, they were all speaking Greek, and the New Testament was written in Greek because of this ideology of Hellenism. That's how powerful ideologies can be. And then today, we are up against 4 deadly ideologies of wokism, liberalism, leftism, and globalism. And so I want to educate people and bring them up to speed on those ideologies. And why are they deadly? Well, in the last century, in the 1900s, we have 2 very well-known ideologies of Nazism and communism. And together, these deadly political thought structures killed over 100 million innocent people. So when I say it's a virus and it's deadly, I'm not exaggerating. I'm not using a metaphor.
No, you're certainly not. I mean, we literally have seen, collectively, when we start looking at, the dictators, the communists, the fascists, the different, there's been, hundreds of millions dead over the 20th century. And it's interesting because many of them have relabeled themselves for moving into the 21st century, but nothing's really changed. I mean, the mechanisms and methodology developed in the 20th century are still being implemented today. I mean, they have new technology. You got the internet, you've got TikTok, you've got social media, you've got all these different things that are being used to manipulate them, but it's still being pushed. So let's pick one of them, right? So let's pick one of your favorites, and let's kind of start at the beginning, and let's talk about how do you, whether it's woke, you go ahead and decide which one, but wokeism, liberalism, pick your ism. How do you see and how do you structure getting a normal? And the way I talked about it in the intro was this. So with regards to wokeism, how do you get a normal and otherwise sane person to wake up one day and say, you know what? That person was born with boy parts. They have boy parts.
Right.
But they wear a dress and want to pretend they're a girl. So we all have a legal duty now to play along with their pretend. How do you get there? How does that become a thing? It's literally the definition of insanity to me.
Well, to go back to the roots of where all 4 of these ideologies come from, they come from a movement in the 1800s that I coined the term Dark Enlightenment, which is basically a response or a reaction, equal or opposite reaction to the European Enlightenment that helped lead to the Liberty Movement of 1776, which is our belief system, our governmental system. And so in this, when the Dark Enlightenment happened, it happened with 3 intellectual forefathers that we are trained and in school and university to worship these guys as folk heroes. at least a couple of them, but they're really not. They're diabolical. The first was Charles Darwin, who came up with the theory of evolution and a few other horrible theories as well. And he said, basically, it gave a rationale for why God didn't exist. Then you have Friedrich Nietzsche, who follows him up and says, if Darwin's right and God doesn't exist, then truth doesn't exist. Morality doesn't exist. Right and wrong doesn't exist. There's no afterlife. So all there is in life is the will to power. And then he was followed up by Karl Marx, who said, if Darwin's right, Nietzsche's right, and all there is will to power and there's no God, then let me give you a 10-step program to achieve will to power. And it's called the Communist Manifesto, the 10 planks of communism. And so then from these, these four modern versions have emerged from that core belief system. But when you, Tom, when you throw truth out the window and God out the window, anything's possible now.
100%.
We believe in we believe in truth, right? That there's true things and false things in the world. The world's made up of true things and false things. But when you believe anything goes, then absolutely a boy can be a girl can be a boy, a child can be a cat or a turtle, whatever they want to be, if you no longer are grounded in anything true.
Yeah. This is interesting. So I've actually made this argument many, many times, so the argument that I've made is the reverse of this, right? So I've kind of pulled it apart from the backwards, and I'm interested because I've never really thought about Darwin being the founder or the impetus for a lot of this, but it's probably true, because what I've said is for moral relativism to be true, which is what they're talking about, right? Then that means that there can be no universal moral constant. If there's a universal moral constant, then there must be a God, because only morality, if it's universal, is a concept. It's a manifestation of consciousness, which can only point to God, right? If it's universal. So I said, well, listen, if moral relativism is true, then it must be true in every instance. If there's one universal moral constant, then moral relativism is a fallacy. And so the question that I posed is, when is it okay to rape an infant? When is it okay to enslave someone because of the color of their skin? And when is it okay to do what Hitler did? And the answer to all three of those is never, which means that we have universal moral constants. So if we have universal moral constants, there must be a God. So when we go to, that's kind of the unwinding of that from where we are now looking backwards. But it's interesting because Darwin, you're right. His the theory of evolution was the underpinning for the idea that there's no God. Now, did Darwin, and I don't know this because I just haven't looked at it, you said he had some other terrible theories. Was that part of his impetus? I mean, was he, was there anything within was his goal to disprove God? Was his goal to look elsewhere? I mean, what else was there?
It's not explicitly stated that I've read that was his goal, but that was the result of his work. He's the founder of secular atheism, or scientific atheism. And then he wrote a follow-up work that's suppressed in Western education. That's The Descent of Man, where he took his theories about animals. And, his first book, actually, Natural Selection, was also about the favored races. They eliminated that part of the title, and sanitize it for modern audience. But the follow-up book, Descent of Man.
So he was a racist.
Oh, massive racist. The stuff in Descent of Man is really jaw-dropping, relating Africans and Aborigines to be more closely related to gorillas than European human beings. And he made statements about the male European being superior. He even made predictions and prophecies in his book that, in not too distant time of the future, the Europeans would wipe out those of the darker continents and what he deemed to be the lesser races. And then Hitler would go on to pick up his works and others, and then Hitler would identify Jews as part of these lesser races of Darwin, though he didn't explicitly say that about Jews. And they used Darwin massively in the 1900s to justify wiping out people groups and genocide. And Darwin called for genocide.
I did not know that. I did not know any of that.
Yeah, there's so much in this book. If you came up in a Western education, your jaw will hit the floor over and over. The cap of your skull will explode because so much was withheld from you. And I go into why. You know, the liberals in the 1920s, 1930s, when their movement really started and took power under FDR, one of the three major pillars of liberalism is the control of the education system. And that was done under John Dewey, who, if you go into a library, it's the Dewey Decimal System, because he basically is the forefather of American education. And he and the other social engineers and social controllers so effectively withheld information through the education system that we are just missing giant gaps of really important data to make proper political decisions and really understand who we're up against.
That's very, very interesting. Okay, so you got Darwin to Nietzsche to Marx, which is, I mean, I can see that, especially now, and I need to do apparently I got to do some homework on Darwin. I did not know he was a racist,
huge
genocidal
racist
nutbag.
Yes.
But to me, eugenics and racism are very hand in hand.
His eugenics comes from his cousin in France, Galton, who was just building upon his research.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the whole thing is this. Okay, so we start there, right? We've got a bunch of sick, twisted monsters, and one of the other things you said that's interesting to me is that was in response. So I've got another theory. I can't take credit for it. It's actually, and I don't know if this guy ever listens to the show, but I had a government teacher in high school who will be very impressed because he thought that I had not woke up once during his class. So he'd be impressed that I took anything from his class. But because I did spend a lot of time sleeping in high school, I was not the best high school student. But he had a theory that everything in politics is like the pendulum of a clock. It goes to the right, it goes to the left. It goes to the right, it goes to the left. And there's periods of times where it swings through the middle, but typically it's going from one side to the other. And it's interesting the way that you said that, we get the liberty movement that led to, the birth of the communist anti-God, nonsense that we have. And
the dark enlightenment.
The dark alignment, as you've described it. That's a really fascinating approach to it. Now, so we've got these bad guys. We've got this dark alignment. We've got these people who hate liberty. They hate freedom. They hate all these things. They're mad because America exists. And, those lousy peasants over there decided that they actually deserved self-determination. And who are they? Because, we, the nobility class and the academic class, should be ruling things. Okay, so that goes, and it starts taking effect, and we can see, and we've talked about in this country, we have the public education system start springing up, the control over public education. But take us through some of the next steps, right? So you've got Marx, Darwin, Nietzsche, all these guys. Take us through the next steps in the process of destroying the concept of freedom, of destroying, the things that we stand for.
Well, it's important to know, and one point on what you're talking about, that Marx's mentor was a guy named Hegel in Germany. He was a professor, and he had a name for that phenomenon of left to right swinging of society. He called it dialectics, that there's this, what he called a messy argument going on in the society, left and right, until they get to a messy solution. And that's how society moves forward.
Wow.
And the globalists take that theory of dialectics, and they've sought to then manipulate and control the narrative on both sides and control the dialectic to try and steer the next phase of society into their favor or control. So just if I want to look that up. But so Darwin is a political philosopher, but mainly what he is he's a atheistic theologian trying to create a new age religion with political theory. That's really what he was seeking to do, and he did it. And so he gave the left a source to a step-by-step guide to achieve will to power, but he also gave them a religion based on political works. So in other words, you could atone for your misdeeds in life and become a good person, a righteous person through political works. And also for these atheists, he gave them something to seek. They couldn't seek heaven because they don't believe in an afterlife. So he gave them something to seek in this life, which is their Valhalla, their paradise, their kingdom, and that's called communist revolution. And so that's why they are so dedicated to bringing revolution in any free country on the earth. And they hate, like you said, they hate liberty-loving countries and constitutional republics. And so this evolves, and then in the 1900s, you get new iterations of Marxist theory as the tree trunk begins to branch out in different countries. And in Russia, it really comes together with the trade unions, which is what Soviet means, and it becomes the Soviet Union or Russian communism. In China, it becomes Chinese communism. The theories sprout in Germany and Italy and become fascism. A lot of people want to twist, or the liberals want to revise the history of Hitler, but Hitler was a socialist. He was a leftist, and he studied Marx, and he studied also theosophy, and to develop his own version of socialism, which was national socialism, not so much focused on trade unions, but focused on national conquest and international conquest. And that's Nazism, National Socialism, a theory of the left based on Marx. Now, he didn't like Marx because Marx is Jewish, but that doesn't mean he didn't like Marx's ideas and apply them. He did. He's a big, huge totalitarian guy. And then when it came to Britain, it took on a different form. It had to adapt, and it became Fabian socialism, and the Fabian Socialist Society, which now runs the Labor Party. And then in America, it had to take on a whole different identity in order to sell itself to the American people. And this came through a guy named Herbert Croly. He's the original intellectual father of liberalism in the United States. And he took Marxist theories and ideas and he adapted them for an American audience. In 1900, the whole country was pretty much either Catholic, Protestant, or Jewish. And so he had to adapt all his ideas to appeal to that kind of an audience that was used to freedom. And so that's a very difficult sell. How do you sell it to that group? Well, you have to cloak it in something else, call it something else, lie about what the true objectives are, and you have to basically run a big marketing and deception campaign. And that's exactly what they did. And so he became a big influencer of FDR, and then FDR became the Alexander the Great of the liberal ideology, and he won in 1932 and swept it into the United States, and we have been plagued by it and cursed with it ever since.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, a lot of people don't realize how disastrous FDR was. I mean, FDR was the beginning of the end of freedom in this country. Yeah, his expansion of the administrative state, and if you look at the history of law a little bit, which is that's my neck of the woods. One of the things that you see is really it was that early 20th century, especially through FDR, where we went from a Democratic Republic laid out in our Constitution to a bureaucracy. I mean, we really, the bureaucratic aspects of the government, and they did it in part, that's when Social Security came in, some of these other things came in. And how do you do it? Well, you start giving people something for nothing, or make them think that you're giving them something for nothing, which is the tenet, one of the core tenet of communism. That's how you get people to buy into communism or any of these other things, is, they think they're going to live in Valhalla. They're getting something for nothing. Oh, look I get to retire for free. Oh, look I get Medicaid. I get Medicare. I get all these different things for free. And nobody has to pay for it, except for everybody has to pay for it. And you're right. It's just another way of bringing communism in, just with a different label. And that is what FDR did foundationally. I mean, the idea that he brought us out of the Great Depression isn't actually correct. It wasn't him or his policies. It was, the America rebounding, as it always does, because people work their tails off, and did what they did. But I mean, that's kind of a pivotal moment, would you say?
Huge turning point. Absolutely. When he brought that in, and if you look at what he did, he started to bring in as many of the 10 planks of Marxism from the Communist Manifesto into the American government and system as he could. And Herbert Croly preached this idea of a massive federal government that controlled the economy, controlled business, and listen to this diabolical catchphrase that he used. He liked the idea of a powerful few. That was his mission. That's the mission of liberalism in 3 words: a powerful few that rule the rest of us. That is liberalism in a nutshell. But he had to sell it to the public, and it was a hard sell because, America stands against Marxism. And so he had to lie to them. And that's why liberals must lie. Everything they do is based on lies, because if they ever showed you who they truly are, the public would reject them. Their belief system is revolting and repulsive. They are a diabolically horrible group of people with awful beliefs. And so that's why I want to expose them for who they really are, in this book.
Yeah, well, I mean, they do the same thing that the communists do, right? What's good for thee is not good for me. You live by certain rules, we live by other rules. Communism is the idea that everybody's going to live equally. Well, what they really mean in communism is everybody shares in the suffering, except for the few elites who get to run everything, who get special treatment because they're above the rest of us. That's communism, and that's really what they're trying to usher in here. I mean, this this, I would argue, even today, is the reason that no one is taking any. I mean, and I'm going to piss everybody off. I'm sorry, but I have not heard Trump talk one bit about antitrust action against Google or anybody else. You've got to, but until we break up these billionaire globalist monopolies, they continue to have that power. And they have that power that sets them apart. And, I mean, ultimately, we either return the power to the people. We have small businesses that are thriving and growing, or we will never have a functional economy again. It's just the way that it is. Yeah. So, but all right. So we translate, we move forward, right? We move forward. We've got FDR. And from there, we get post World War II. Everybody comes back, and the country is hyper conservative. That post World War II era is probably the most Christian conservative era of our modern country. Unless you disagree.
No, I agree.
That was that dialectic. We swung very far to the right. Yeah. Which led to the 60s.
Yes.
So let's talk about that, because I'm guessing that plays a big part of your into your thinking.
It does. So let's backtrack just a second. I'll go to, and then that'll lead into the 60s.
Please.
So like I said, there's many groups that are developing and evolving the theory of the left, the theory of Marxism and Darwin and all this. And so there's a group in Germany in the 1930s in Frankfurt that are all college professors and all communists. And they called their think tank the Frankfurt School. And they were trying to troubleshoot a big problem. Communism had worked tremendously well in Russia in their era, but it hadn't taken hold in Western Europe or the United States.
Tremendously well, because there were a lot of people that died.
Well, they got their Valhalla, they got their revolution. And remember, it's not about the people. They don't care about the people. Those are the unfit. Those are the animals that deserve to die.
By working well, what they mean is the useless eaters may have died off, but there were the leaders gained their power that they rightly deserved.
The powerful few achieved the will to power, which is the purpose of their lives. And so that's what everything's about. If you understand that, you understand everything. Oh. And so they wanted to understand, well, how can we get Marx's ideas to take hold in America and Western Europe? And they came up with a theory. Max Horkheimer and Herbert Marcuse and these others at the Frankfurt School came up with a theory of critical theory, which is what they call cultural Marxism. And so the idea here is that the old proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, which is traditional class warfare, where you incite the poor to rise up and kill off or conquer the rich and take the country with revolution. That didn't work in America because Teddy Roosevelt had the original Christian progressive movement in the 1800s, and he reformed the country, the working laws, the working hours, the safety of products, child labor. And so all of a sudden the standard of living was raised. There was a middle class, and they didn't want a revolution in America because of those reforms. Capitalism was working for everyone. And so they had to come up with a second idea. And so their idea was to, instead of attacking rich versus poor, because you always have to have class warfare that leads to social justice. That's the formula for revolution. In class warfare, you divide a whole society into groups and make them go to war against each other. And so they said, well, let's attack the men and the women. Let's have women look at themselves as a lower class and teach them that they're oppressed by the patriarchy. and let's take minorities in each country and teach them that they are oppressed by the majority, which is in Europe and the United States, white people. And then let's even take fringe groups like lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgenders, and teach them that they're being oppressed by who? The straights and the gender normative people. And let's attack the vector points of culture instead of economics, rich versus poor, class warfare. So they selected a cultural class warfare to lead to their future social justice revolution. And that's critical theory. Criticize the West, criticize America. Don't ever talk about anything good that they've done. Only criticize them and turn people negative against them. That's the idea that they came up with. And that evolved from the 1930s. It migrated here. They had to leave Germany because, the Nazis and communists did not get along. And they left Germany, went to Italy, and then came to New York. And so then the woke virus came here. And then in the 60s, Marcuse, one of these guys, was upset that there weren't enough communist radicals in the leftist movement in America after the 50s, that movement you talked about. And so he started a radicalist movement called New Left Radicalism. And that's where all of the commotion and the chaos of the 60s came from. He led that, Herbert Marcuse. And he taught all of these crazy ideas, like, sexual relativism and even if you're straight, try homosexuality. He was a big time homosexual and bisexual. He died from that lifestyle. But he taught all of these crazy ideas because he wanted to incite radicalism in the leftist movement. And all of the politicians that are in there, like late 60s, 70s, 80s right now in DC on the Democrat side, they come from that movement. Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals, all of that content, all of these people come from that era, that movement. That's what we're dealing with. Even some of their parents, like Barack Obama's parents and others, came out of that radicalism movement. And then that same movement continued to evolve over time in France and in America at the universities, and eventually becomes what we now call woke. And what woke is the evolution of that critical theory, that cultural Marxism, designed to attack America and the West.
So this is a really fascinating thing, and something I've never heard anyone explain in that way. So it's manifest to everybody that's paying attention, right? The goal of the class war, of the race baiting, the sex baiting, all that stuff, is to create cultural, discourse, to cause problems, to create issues in our country. But one of the things I've never heard explained the way that you just did it was the idea that this took the place of the historical kind of class warfare that was based on economics, the rich versus the poor, right? The nobility versus, and it makes a lot of sense because you're right, with the protection. So capitalism, without any sort of regulation, and I'm going to upset some people, but if you do your homework on this, you're going to find out this is true. Capitalism is the natural way of things, but it has to be regulated, because capitalism in and of itself is the quest for money at all other, regardless of expense. So there has to be morality with capitalism, or it doesn't work, right? Because if there's no morality with it, well, then you can have child labor, right? You can do it doesn't matter what you do. So the quest for money has to be tempered by morality, which makes sense for anybody who's Christian or a faith of any type. But there's a necessity that capitalism be at the core of the financial system. Now, when you do that, you get what we had in the early part of the 20th century in this country, which is a burgeoning middle class. And as that middle class grows, you create stability. People who are happy to try and do everything they can to create wealth as long as it's moral. That is kind of the perfect formula, and that's really what led America to being the greatest country on the planet, a moral capitalist country. Now, then you've got this middle class, and you aren't going to get a revolution in America because everybody's happy. Nobody's going to take up arms and kill each other over what? Right. I'm living okay. I'm not starving. So then, these guys, they go back to the drawing board, and like you said, how do you apply this in the United States? How do you disrupt a country that's that stable and that good? Well, what you do is you turn the people against each other for another reason. So you turn men against women, women against men. You turn black against white, and brown against white, and white against whatever.
Yes.
And you continue to create this discourse and just mess that they have. So that's kind of a fascinating thing, and that's certainly, it's not just propagated now. It's actually, I mean, that was foundational to what Obama was pushing, and then Biden. Trump disrupted it, but I mean that was foundational. That is wokeism. I mean, and at some point we got so messed up with it. And I would argue, and I'm curious about this. One of the things that I see is you tend to do things in incremental steps, right? So if we want to get you to be accepting of something on the left that doesn't make any sense, most of what they do is very incremental, but every now and then they'll take a giant leap. And instead of moving you this far, they try and move you this far. And they know you aren't going to probably go with it. But at the end, if they end up moving you this far, it's still a win, right? So that's what I think the transgender movement was, right? This whole transgender thing, which is collapsing as we speak, because, I mean, the idea that me telling you that I'm a girl because I put a dress on and you have to believe that is absurd. I mean, you see it in the sports, we see it. I mean, it's just absurd. But it still served a purpose. It moved a lot of people even further to the left. And even though it was ridiculous, and even though it's eventually going to collapse, it still moved people further to the left. And I think that that's kind of part of it. I think the strategy is interesting. You keep moving each other against each other, and every now and then you take a giant leap to really get people to go against each other. And I mean, that's kind of, do you have a reaction to that?
I do. Yeah, they have been moving us, and thank God, they sort of got drunk on their own supply with the woke thing whipping up after the Ferguson riots, and then really becoming a massive movement in 2020 with the George Floyd riots, the Summer of Love riots. And the Democrats just really sort of got carried away with that, thinking that movement was much more popular than it was. And they started to really come out of the closet, and the actual liberal, like the real Marxist liberals, started to really show their true colors a lot. Even Nancy Pelosi tried to introduce rules into the Congress to no longer use the terms mother or father. They hate the family.
They do.
Destroy the nuclear family, and using birthing person and whatnot. And just starting to really shock the public in these subtle ways, exposing their true beliefs. And see, they can only move forward if they lie and conceal and hide what they truly are. And so that worked to Trump's advantage tremendously, that they were really going so extreme. The trans thing is very interesting if you'd like to dig into that
please. Please tell me what you think.
So around the time that Marcuse was generating the new left radical movement, the movement was also really, it's always been obsessed with sex and really strange forms of sex and sex practices, sex lifestyles. And so there was a guy named Alfred Kinsey who was the preeminent sexologist in that period. And he was studying sex. He would film sex. He would study and observe, his employees and his test subjects having sex, straight sex, homosexual sex, all different types. And he himself was a bisexual man. And he was fascinated with pedophilia, sex with children. So he would interview pedophiles and get the gratuitous details of like children having orgasms, disturbing things like that. But he was obsessed with it. And so from him, you sort of get and from another guy in France, Michel Foucault, you get the LGB part, right? The promotion and the fascination with homosexual and bisexual lifestyles and sexual orientations and whatnot. And so then his counterpart was a guy named John Money. And from him, you get T, which is he was doing psychotic experiments on young children. There was a set of twins and the Reimers, and the one boy was born. He had a botched circumcision, and so John Money was somehow the psychologist to the family, and he got the parents to agree to give him sex reassignment surgery as a baby and turn him into a girl, and then he continue to study the boy and the transgendered boy, the twins, as they developed. And then he would do sick experiments with them in his office, like have them simulate having sex with one another when they were very small. And he would photograph them. He would examine their genitals. He's pretty much a sexual offender. But he wrote books about this. And this idea, this theory called gender and queer theory, that gender was not really a static thing. Like, again, you're going back to no truth. There's not a true thing and a false thing like you and I would think. There are many, many shades of gray, so to speak, 50 shades of gray, so 50 million genders. And so he wrote 2 books about these theories of gender reassignment and the fact that he coined the term gender fluidity that we have now, that you could easily, and it was natural, normal to change someone from male to female, female to male. And so with Kinsey and money, you have the LGB and the T. And that's where it comes from. Now, later, David Reimer, the one who was transgendered as a baby, and his brother would learn the truth that he was born a male. He went right back immediately, I think at the age of 14 or 15, to being a male as soon as he learned that his parents had done this to him. And then they both had very horrible, lives. And eventually both boys committed suicide as young men. That's how horrible, that's the source. That's the origin story of the transgender movement that's now everywhere. They're pushing on children everywhere. This diabolical, heinous thing, this worse than the child genital mutilations of Africa. Remember the female circumcision in Africa, and all the liberals were going insane. But now what they want to do to 5 and 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds is diabolical. It's like the Hellraiser movie. It's so much worse than what the Muslims were doing in Africa. I condemn both, but my God, I mean, it just goes to show how hypocritical and false they are. But when you don't believe in God, morality, or truth, this is the kind of stuff you'll fall for. And so that's where that comes from. Now, what they're teaching these blue and green-haired kindergarten teachers is what I call the 5 lies. I believe that the woke thing and the liberal thing is really distilled and condensed down to 5 lies that they preach. This is their message, their gospel to the followers of the liberal, dogma. And that is radical feminism. It's critical race theory, which we're mostly familiar with now. It's climate alarmism. It's traditional social justice, because they just can't let go of that. And then it's LGBTism. And with LGBTism, what people don't understand is they're teaching these young liberal college students that go on to become your kids' teachers that children are not born heterosexual, and they are not born male or female. That the male or female idea, or the heterosexuality idea, is a social construct that is being forced on these poor, helpless children by their parents, by their churches, by their society. And that they're teaching these deranged, indoctrinated students that it's their job to go and save these kids from these horrible social constructs of being forced to be heterosexual, forced to be male, forced to be female. So they actually believe they're doing something moral and righteous, a political work that's going to lead them to be a good person by saving the children from heterosexuality and from being the gender they were born as. That's the piece of the puzzle I don't think people realize of what we're dealing with. It's ideological. It's a religion for them. It's just beyond words.
Well, this is one of the things that I think is most foundational, and a lot of what we don't understand here, right? So you have to understand when you go to fight someone, whether it be in the realm of public opinion, whether it be war, whether it be whatever sort of a fight there is, you have to understand that the person you're fighting is fighting because they believe strongly in what they're doing. And so you have to ask yourself why. And if you want to understand your opponent, you have to go to the why. And so when we talk about these whacked out kids that come out of college and are teaching babies that they can, babies in this case being kindergartners through 5th grade, 6th grade, that they can be boys if they're girls or girls if they're boys, you have to ask yourself, well, why would they do that? Are they all perverts? What's wrong with them? And the reality is it's not. It's actually that they're attempting to do what they think is right. They just don't know what's right. They don't understand. It's this kind of moral relativistic nonsense that somehow it's right or acceptable for a baby that's born a girl to pretend it's a boy, or born a boy to pretend it's a girl, and that the rest of society somehow has a duty to believe that. Well, your imagination does not dictate my reality, and it never will. It's not something that's feasible or real. And what's happening is these kids are literally, they're fighting for a cause. These kids coming out of college are fighting for a cause they believe to be righteous, even though a sane person who steps back and looks at the big picture is going to say, wait a second, you've lost your mind. And that's why eventually so many of them turn 40 and wake up and say, oh my God, I'm an idiot. Because eventually you start to look at what you're saying and you realize it just doesn't make, the sky is blue, 2 + 2 is 4. And what I did was absurd. So, there is a reality that because there are universal truths, eventually these people wake up, but the damage that they do in the meantime is monumental. What do you think? Are we onto this? I mean, where are we at on this?
Yeah, well, they either wake up at 40 or they go burn down a Tesla dealership.
There's that.
One of two options, I guess.
There's that, right? There are some lost causes. So
yeah, they're lost. These people are lost. This is their religion. When after Marx, and the success in the Soviet Union, when the revolutionaries wanted to bring communism to places like Venezuela or Cuba or China, they had to really develop a process. Even the surrounding states around Russia, when they wanted to collapse them and absorb them into the Soviet Union, they had to create a process for doing that. And they really did. They developed like a 4-stage process. And the first part of that's called demoralization. Yeah. And that's where they launched this huge campaign through media, arts, and education to demoralize the public or weaken their minds in order to eventually collapse their society through the other 3 stages. And in demoralization, part of it, the half that's going to go along with you that you're able to deceive, they become completely indoctrinated to the point where they're like an occult, and you could present them with all the true information, the facts right in front of their face, and they would not be able to believe you because they are so utterly, thoroughly, successfully indoctrinated. For the other side, like guys like you and me, they would seek to get us not to be indoctrinated because we wouldn't be able to be indoctrinated, but they would want to demoralize us to the point where we would just give up hope that anything could be done.
Well, and that's been something that we've seen here a lot, and I see a lot in my world, because we had so many of us that came together, 2020, you're going to lock us down, this, that, and other, and 21 and 2022, we're all fighting, and everybody's fighting like hell. And a lot of, so many of my friends who were, avid patriots fighting like hell, they took so many blows, they were so beat up that they're tired. They're worn out. They're just like, man, okay, sure. Listen, we got Trump's there, that's good enough. Right. And we can't be that way because Trump needs our help, to be honest. He does. We the people are the ones that are going to decide our freedom or not. It'll never be a politician. It'll never be the king. It'll never be ultimately our freedom depends on our willingness to fight for our freedom and to not stand aside and to allow tyranny to reign. And but unfortunately that strategy is very effective, and the bad guys tend to not have a problem with trying to outweigh us. What do you think's happening now, and what do you think? Where do you think we're going to be going in the next couple of years? How's this looking to you?
So I place, it's very interesting. I go through these 4 ideologies in the book, then I go through our history that's been held back. There's many stories you've never heard that you need to know about that are fundamental to who we are in our movement as conservatives and populists. But then I go into solutions, and I finished the book last summer, and it took me a long time to bring it to market, prep a book. Oh. But I had a whole agenda, basically a legislative agenda in there for eventually the next either Trump or whoever. I didn't know if he was going to win. And what's just been gratifying is that he did win, and then 80 to 90% of the items in there that I had under my recommendations, he's already done or is talking about doing. Well, and some of them were really out there, but the desperate times call for desperate measures. Yeah. And I also break down basically a process, identify the pattern of ideology, but then I identify the pattern for fixing things. And that's called 3 words: massive institutional reform. Yeah. And so that's a 4-part process. I do some case studies, show you the pattern, and then show you how to reform your country so that America can do it and Colombia can do it. Mexico and Brazil and Western Europe can do this. Australia, New Zealand. I want all Western countries to reform and be stronger than we ever were before, more free than we ever were before. So first you have to rediscover, you've got to learn all the things about who we're up against, what our system is, how it works, how to win. And then the second stage is reclaim, a reclamation movement where we take back the country from the leftists that's been ours in the first place. Not a revolution, but a reclamation. We had that in America. The other countries still need to have that, but we have that in America now with Trump getting back in office, retaking our government. The third stage is called reform. That's where they begin to change, fix things, fire people, slash the employee roster, fix the budget. And the fourth stage, which you started with talking, which I absolutely agree with you, is called redress of grievances. And that's where you administer justice. Now, if you don't do the fourth step effectively, which is really up to the Attorney General in the United States, the head prosecutor, an investigative body, if they don't investigate the crimes that are being revealed and prosecute these people and punish them, then you're at major risk of the leftists sweeping right back into power at their next available moment. And the end state will be worse than the first. If you're a Christian and you know the parable Jesus taught about the spirit that goes out of a man, and if you don't sweep the house together and occupy it, then he'll go get 7 of his friends and come back, and the house will be worse than at first. We're in more danger than we've ever been in before if we don't have an attorney general that's going to administer justice and be swift about it. And like you said, expose the files, expose the criminals, and then have not a few attorneys, an army of attorneys, an army of prosecutors that are going out there and doing the job of the justice system and correcting the wrongs that have been committed under these leftist regimes. Then the reforms will not last. The leftists will get back in, and it will be worse than
100%. We got to pray for justice. Well, I got to tell you, TS, this has been one of the most fascinating interviews I've had in a while. I really have enjoyed this. Get a copy of TS's book, The Woke Mind Viruses. We got Wokism, Liberalism, Leftism, and Globalism. This has been a great conversation. I mean, honestly, I need people. I hope people share this show. Comment, share on the show. We need to make sure that people see this show. I want people to hear what's happening. I want them to understand. I mean, this story is a huge story. It's a big deal. And if we don't understand this, we're not going to get anywhere. And we have to do this. We have to push us. It's we the people that free ourselves and have preserve the future for our children. So support us at TomRenz.com. TomRenz.com. You got to type that. Also, givesendgo.com/RensLaw, givesendgo.com/RensLaw. Thanks, everybody, for watching. TS, thank you for your time, and we will be back